The church doors exploded inward just as the banker's wrinkled hand reached for her wrist. Snow whirled through the chapel, every head turned, and there, silhouetted against the white mountain beyond, stood a man the town had declared dead years ago. Gideon Vale, the killer of Black Hollow Ridge. He looked straight at Evelyn Hart, the terrified bride being sold like livestock, and his voice cut through the frozen silence. I haven't looked at a woman in 10 years. Until now. What happens when a desperate woman and a broken outlaw collide in a town built on lies? Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The marriage auction wasn't supposed to happen in a church, but Walter Crowley enjoyed the irony. Evelyn Hart stood at the altar in a dress that didn't fit, staring at the wooden cross above the pulpit while her hands trembled so badly she had to lock them together just to keep from collapsing. The pews were packed. Every family in Ash Creek had come to watch, not because they wanted to, but because Crowley made sure they understood what happened to people who didn't show up when he called. Her father had been dead 3 months. The debts he left behind had been reasonable, manageable even. A year's worth of payments at most. Then Crowley bought them, and suddenly $500 became $2,000. Interest rates tripled overnight. Payment deadlines appeared that hadn't existed before. When Evelyn went to the sheriff, he wouldn't even look at her. When she tried the territorial courthouse in Silver Falls, the clerk told her Crowley owned the judge. So here she stood, 23 years old, being auctioned off to the highest bidder in front of everyone she'd ever known. Except there were no other bidders. Crowley had made sure of that too. The sum, Crowley announced from the front pew, his voice smooth as oil, is $2,000, payable immediately. Or, he smiled, showing teeth too white for a man his age. The debt transfers through marriage, as witnessed by this congregation and recognized under territorial contract law. Evelyn's stomach turned. The preacher, a thin, nervous man named Dalton, who'd baptized her as a child, stood behind the pulpit with a Bible he wouldn't open. He kept glancing at Crowley, then at Evelyn, then down at his own shaking hands. "Anyone?" Crowley called out, playing to the crowd. "Any man here willing to pay $2,000 for Miss Hart's freedom?" Silence. Evelyn looked across the faces she'd known her entire life. Mrs. Chen, who used to give her peppermints after school. Daniel Frost, who'd asked her to dance at the Harvest Festival 3 years running. The Calloway brothers, who worked the lumber mill with her father before he died. Not one of them met her eyes. No? Crowley stood slowly, adjusting his coat. He was 70 if he was a day, but he moved like a man who'd never been told no in his life. Then as the primary creditor, I invoke contracted claim. Evelyn's knees buckled. She caught herself on the altar rail. This couldn't be happening. Crowley walked toward her, each footstep echoing on the chapel floorboards. You'll find I'm a generous husband, Miss Hart. You'll have a home, security, protection. His smile widened. And I'll forgive your father's failures. He didn't fail, Evelyn whispered. You changed the terms. Speak up, dear. The congregation can't hear you. She raised her chin. You're a thief. The chapel went dead silent. Crowley stopped 3 feet away. His expression didn't change, but something cold slid behind his eyes. Careful. You stole from my father, from half the families here. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. Everyone knows it. They're just too afraid to say it. Miss Hart, Preacher Dalton tried to interject. Enough! Crowley's voice dropped to a register that made the floorboards feel colder. He turned to the congregation. Does anyone here wish to dispute my legal claim? No one moved. He turned back to Evelyn. Then we're done talking. His hand reached for her wrist, and the doors exploded inward. The entire chapel flinched as freezing wind tore through the entrance. Snow swirled across the floorboards, candles gutted. Every head whipped toward the doorway. A man stood there, tall. So tall he had to duck slightly under the frame, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a coat that looked like it had been stitched from wolf pelts and old canvas. Ice clung to his beard. His hair was dark, longer than any respectable man wore it, tied back rough. His hands hung loose at his sides, but there was something about the way he stood that made every man in the room instinctively calculate whether they could reach a weapon in time. Evelyn's breath caught. She knew who he was. Everyone did. Gideon Vale, someone whispered. Another voice hissed, "That's not possible." But it was. Gideon Vale, the man who'd killed 4 ranchers in the land wars a decade ago, the man who'd vanished into the mountains after the territorial marshal declared him wanted dead or alive, the man parents used to scare children into behaving. Cross Black Hollow Ridge after dark, and Gideon Vale will take you. He stepped into the chapel. Snow fell from his coat in clumps. Crowley went rigid. "You're not welcome here." Gideon didn't look at him. His eyes, dark, unreadable, locked on Evelyn. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His gaze pinned her in place like a wolf deciding whether something was prey or something else entirely. "I haven't looked at a woman in 10 years, Gideon said quietly. The entire room leaned forward, straining to hear. Until now. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs. Gideon crossed the distance between them in 4 strides. The crowd recoiled. Crowley stumbled backward, his face flushing red. "You have no right." Gideon stopped directly in front of Evelyn. Up close, he was even bigger than she'd thought. Scars traced his knuckles. His jaw was hard as the ridge he lived on. But his eyes weren't cruel. They were tired. "You want out of this?" he asked her. Evelyn's voice failed. She managed a nod. "Then come here." She hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this man was dangerous, that trading one monster for another wouldn't save her. But then Crowley's voice cut through the chapel. "She's mine. Legal contract. You can't." Gideon moved so fast, Evelyn barely saw it. One moment he was standing still. The next, his hand was around the back of her neck, pulling her forward, and his mouth was on hers. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a brand, a declaration, a line drawn in blood and snow that said mine louder than any contract Crowley could ever write. When he pulled back, Evelyn's knees almost gave out. Gideon didn't let her fall. He kept one arm around her waist and turned to face Preacher Dalton, who looked like he might faint. "Marry us," Gideon said. "Now." Dalton's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I can't." "You just tried to marry her to him." Gideon jerked his chin toward Crowley. "So marry her to me instead. There are laws. There's a law that says you can sell a woman to pay her dead father's debts." Gideon's voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "That the law you're worried about?" Dalton looked desperately at Crowley. Crowley's face had gone purple. "This is insane. She's under legal obligation." "She's under your obligation," Gideon interrupted, "which ends the second she's married to someone else." He looked back at Dalton. "Isn't that right, Preacher?" Dalton swallowed hard. "Technically, yes. If she consents to marriage with another party, the contract transfers. She consents." Gideon glanced down at Evelyn. "Right?" Evelyn stared up at him. "This man was a killer. Everyone said so. He'd murdered people, disappeared into the wilderness, lived like an animal for 10 years. But his hand around her waist was steady. Not possessive, not cruel. Just there. And for the first time in 3 months, she wasn't drowning. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder. "Yes, I consent." The chapel erupted. Chet. Crowley lunged forward, but 2 of his own hired men caught his arms. Not to protect Gideon, but to keep Crowley from doing something that would get him killed. Voices overlapped, shouting, arguing. Mrs. Chen stood up in the pews, her face pale. Daniel Frost looked like he'd been punched. Gideon ignored all of it. "Get on with it," he told Dalton. The preacher's hands shook so badly, he dropped the Bible twice. There are procedures. You've got 2 minutes before I walk out that door with her anyway," Gideon said flatly. "Your choice whether she leaves married or not." Dalton looked at Evelyn. Do you truly want this?" Did she? She didn't know this man, didn't know if the stories were true, didn't know if he'd hurt her the second they were alone. But she knew Crowley, and she knew she'd rather die in the mountains than spend one night under his roof. "Do it," she said. Dalton's face crumpled. But he opened the Bible. His voice trembled through the vows. Short, clipped, nothing like the flowery ceremony Evelyn had imagined as a girl. No flowers, no music, Just a terrified preacher stammering through legal phrases while the most dangerous man in the territory stood beside her, still holding her upright. Do you, Gideon Vale, take this woman? I do. Do you, Evelyn Hart, take this man? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territorial government, I pronounce you. Gideon kissed her again before Dalton could finish. This time it was different, slower, still possessive, but there was something almost careful about it, like he was sealing a promise instead of staking a claim. When he pulled back, his thumb brushed her cheekbone once. Then he turned to the congregation. Anyone got a problem with this? Silence. Even Crowley had gone quiet, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Gideon's gaze swept across the crowd, daring someone, anyone, to challenge him. When no one moved, he nodded once. Good. He scooped Evelyn up like she weighed nothing. She gasped, grabbing his coat for balance. What are you? We're leaving. He started toward the door. Wait, my things. What things? My clothes, my mother's jewelry. I have a trunk at the boarding house. Gideon stopped, looked down at her. You go back there. Crowley's men will be waiting. That what you want? Evelyn's protest died in her throat. He was right. The second Gideon left, Crowley would send every hired gun in Ash Creek after them. Going back for her belongings would be suicide. I don't have anything, she whispered. Something flickered in Gideon's expression. You've got me. That'll have to be enough. Then he carried her straight out of the chapel into the snow. The cold hit her like a fist. Evelyn gasped, burying her face against Gideon's chest as wind tore through the thin fabric of her dress. He didn't slow down, just kept walking, his boots crunching through snow that was already ankle-deep and rising. Where are we going? She managed. Home. Where's home? Mountains. That was all he said. A horse waited at the edge of town, a massive bay gelding that looked half wild. Gideon set Evelyn down just long enough to pull a thick wool blanket from the saddlebag and wrap it around her shoulders. Then he lifted her again, settling her sideways across the saddle before swinging up behind her. One arm locked around her waist, the other took the reins. Hold on, he said. Then he kicked the horse into a run. They rode for hours. Evelyn lost track of time somewhere between the third ridge and the fourth. Everything blurred together, trees whipping past, snow falling harder, the rhythmic thunder of hooves beneath them. Gideon didn't speak, didn't stop, just kept the horse moving at a brutal pace that would have killed a lesser animal. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt numb. Everything that had just happened, the auction, the kiss, the marriage, it didn't feel real. It felt like something that had happened to someone else. Some other version of Evelyn Hart, who made reckless decisions and married killers and ran away into blizzards. Not her. Except it was her. And she was freezing. Her teeth started chattering somewhere around the 5th mile. By the 7th, she'd lost feeling in her toes. The blanket helped, but her dress was soaked through, and the wind cut straight to her bones. Gideon's arm tightened around her. Almost there. Almost where? Her voice came out shaky. Cabin. How much farther? Not far. That was the most words he'd strung together since they left town. Evelyn tried to stay conscious, but exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide. Her head kept drooping forward. Every time it did, Gideon's hand would shift, steadying her, keeping her upright. She didn't remember falling asleep, but when she opened her eyes again, they'd stopped. The cabin wasn't what she expected. It stood in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, built low and solid from thick timber that looked like it had been cut by hand. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A small barn sat off to one side, and beyond that, the ground dropped away into nothing, a sheer cliff that overlooked miles of frozen wilderness. Black Hollow Ridge, and Gideon dismounted first, then pulled Evelyn down. Her legs almost buckled. He caught her frowning. You hurt? Just cold. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Get inside. I'll deal with the horse. Evelyn stumbled toward the cabin door. It wasn't locked. Inside, the space was small. One main room with a fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a few chairs, and a bed pushed against the far wall. Furs covered the floor. Tools hung on the walls. Everything was worn but clean. It smelled like wood smoke and leather, and something else she couldn't name. She stood in the middle of the room, dripping melted snow onto the floorboards, and tried to remember how to breathe. She was married to a stranger, a killer, and she was alone with him in the middle of nowhere. The door opened behind her. Evelyn spun around, her heart in her throat. Gideon stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. He glanced at her, then at the fireplace. "You know how to start a fire?" She shook her head. He crossed to the hearth, knelt, and had flames going in under a minute. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the cold. Evelyn inched closer, holding her hands out toward the heat. Gideon stood, watching her. "You're soaked." "I'm fine. You'll freeze in that dress." "I don't have anything else." He disappeared into a corner and came back with a shirt. Massive, flannel, probably his. "Wear this." Evelyn took it automatically, then realized what he was asking. Where do I... Gideon gestured to a curtain she hadn't noticed before. It sectioned off a small corner of the room. "There." She retreated behind the curtain, fingers fumbling with the buttons of her dress. They were swollen from the cold, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. It took 3 tries to get the first one undone. On the other side of the curtain, she heard Gideon moving around. Footsteps. The clink of metal. Water pouring. She finally got the dress off and pulled his shirt over her head. It swallowed her, hung past her knees, sleeves dangling a foot beyond her fingertips. But it was dry and warm. When she stepped out, Gideon had set a pot of something over the fire. He glanced at her, and for just a second something unreadable crossed his face. Then he looked away. "Sit." Evelyn sat at the table. A few minutes later, he handed her a tin cup filled with broth. Simple, salty, hot enough to burn her tongue. She didn't care. She drank it in 3 gulps. Gideon refilled it without asking. They sat in silence while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. Evelyn kept stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile the stories with the man in front of her. He didn't look like a monster. He looked tired. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Why did you do it?" Gideon didn't look up from his own cup. "Do what?" "Marry me. You don't know me." "You don't know me either." "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I was in town buying supplies. Heard people talking about the auction, about Crowley." His jaw tightened. "I know what men like him do to women they think they own." Evelyn's throat closed up. "So you... what? Decided to rescue me? Decided you deserved a choice?" He finally looked at her. "You had one. You took it. I chose you because I didn't know what else to do." "I know." "You could be worse than him." "I could be." "Are you?" Gideon held her gaze. "Guess you'll find out." It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest, and somehow that mattered. Eat. Evelyn slept in the bed. Gideon took the floor. She hadn't asked him to. He just laid out furs near the fire, stretched out on them, and closed his eyes like it was the most natural thing in the world. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe. He didn't snore, didn't move much, just lay there, still as stone. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in months, safe. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But as the fire burned low and exhaustion finally dragged her under, Evelyn realized something. For the first time since her father died, she wasn't alone, and that had to count for something. What? She woke to the smell of coffee. Pale light filtered through the cabin's single window. The fire had been rebuilt, and Gideon stood at the stove pouring dark liquid into 2 cups. Evelyn sat up slowly. Her entire body ached, muscles she didn't know she had protesting yesterday's ride. Gideon glanced over. "You're up." "What time is it?" "Dawn. Maybe an hour past." He brought her a cup. "Drink this." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint. Evelyn grimaced, but drank it anyway. Gideon sat across from her. "What? We need to talk." Her stomach dropped. "About what?" "What happens next?" I thought I was staying here." "You are. For now." He leaned back in his chair. "But Crowley's not going to let this go. He'll come looking, and when he does, you need to be ready." "Ready for what?" To defend yourself. Evelyn stared at him. I don't know how to... I'll teach you. Gideon's expression didn't change. Shooting, tracking, survival. Everything you need to live up here. Why? Because I'm not always going to be around, and if someone comes for you when I'm not here, you need to be able to handle it. The words were blunt, practical. No comfort in them. But Evelyn understood. He wasn't promising to protect her forever. He was promising to make sure she could protect herself. Okay, she said quietly. Gideon nodded. We start today. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and discovery. Gideon taught her everything. How to load and fire a rifle, how to skin a rabbit, how to read weather in the clouds, how to move through snow without leaving tracks, how to start a fire with wet wood, how to tell which plants were edible and which would kill her. He was patient, never raised his voice, never grabbed her when she fumbled, just showed her again and again and again. Slowly, Evelyn stopped feeling like a helpless girl from town. She learned to cook over an open flame, learned to chop wood without taking off a finger, learned to anticipate the rhythms of the mountain when storms were coming, when animals were near, when something wasn't right. And she learned Gideon. He didn't talk much, but he listened, watched, noticed things, like how she hated the taste of venison but wouldn't say so. So he started trapping more rabbit, like how she was scared of the dark. So he always kept the fire going through the night, like how she flinched every time he moved too fast. So he started moving slower. He never touched her, never pushed, never demanded anything. At night, he still slept on the floor. And every morning, Evelyn woke up wondering why that bothered her. Matag. 4 weeks after the wedding, the first bounty hunter came. Evelyn was outside hauling water when she heard the horse. She froze, bucket halfway to the ground, and looked toward the tree line. A man emerged, tall, lean, wearing a marshal's badge that looked real, but probably wasn't. He had a rifle across his lap and a smug expression that made Evelyn's skin crawl. Well, well, he drawled, you must be the kidnapped bride. Evelyn's heart hammered. She glanced toward the cabin. Gideon was inside. He'd hear. He'd come. I'm not kidnapped, she said carefully. The man laughed. Sure you're not. That's what they all say. He dismounted slowly. Walter Crowley's offering $500 for your safe return, and another $1,000 for Gideon Vale, dead or alive. I'm not going back. Didn't ask if you wanted to, sweetheart. He took a step toward her. The cabin door opened. Gideon stood in the doorway, holding a rifle so casually it looked like part of his arm. The bounty hunter stopped. Vale. Leave. Can't do that. Got a contract. You've got a death wish. Gideon's voice was flat, empty. The voice of a man who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. The bounty hunter's smirk faltered. There's more coming. You kill me, 10 more will show up. Then I'll kill them too. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Evelyn did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She picked up the rifle Gideon had taught her to use, the one he'd left leaning against the woodpile that morning. She raised it, aimed it at the bounty hunter. Her hands didn't shake. My husband told you to leave, she said quietly. The bounty hunter's eyes widened. He looked between her and Gideon, and whatever he saw in their faces made him back toward his horse. This isn't over, he muttered. Yeah, Gideon said. It is. The man rode off. Evelyn lowered the rifle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Gideon crossed the clearing. He took the gun from her hands gently. You okay? She nodded, then shook her head, then started laughing, high and breathless and borderline hysterical. I almost shot him, she gasped. You should have. She looked up at Gideon. He wasn't joking. He'll go back to Crowley, Gideon continued. Tell him where we are. More will come. I know. You sure you want to stay? Evelyn thought about the cabin, the mountains, the quiet mornings and the hard work, and the man standing in front of her who'd given her a choice when no one else would. I'm sure, she said. Something shifted in Gideon's expression, just for a second. Then it was gone. But Evelyn saw it, and for the first time she wondered if maybe, just maybe, this marriage wasn't just about saving her. Maybe it was saving him too. Dishaka. That night, after dinner, Gideon handed her something wrapped in cloth. "What is this?" Evelyn asked. "Open it." She unwrapped the fabric slowly. Inside was a knife, small, perfectly balanced, with a handle carved from antler. "For you," Gideon said. "Keep it on you. Always." Evelyn ran her thumb along the blade. It was sharp enough to split hair. "Did you make this?" "Yeah." "It's beautiful." He shrugged. "It's practical." But the way he'd carved the handle, smooth, fitted perfectly to her grip, said otherwise. Evelyn looked up at him. "Thank you." Gideon nodded, then stood like he was going to walk away. "Wait," Evelyn said. He stopped. She didn't know what she wanted to say. Didn't know how to put words to the thing growing between them, this strange, fragile trust that felt more real than any legal document. So instead she said, "Why do you sleep on the floor?" Gideon went very still. "It's your bed," Evelyn continued. "Your cabin. I'm the one who showed up uninvited. You're my wife. In name. Still counts. Does it?" The question hung between them. Gideon's jaw worked. "What are you asking?" Evelyn didn't know. She just knew she was tired of sleeping alone, tired of pretending this was temporary, tired of being scared of something that hadn't happened yet. "I'm asking if you're ever going to stop treating me like I'm going to break." Gideon stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Not close, not touching, just there. "I don't think you'll break," he said quietly. "I think you're the strongest person I've ever met." Evelyn's breath caught. "But I also think—" He stopped, started again. "I've done things. Bad things. And I don't want you looking at me one day and realizing you made a mistake. What if I don't? What if you do?" Evelyn reached out, slowly, carefully. She placed her hand over his. His skin was rough, scarred, warm. "Then I'll tell you," she said, "but you have to give me the chance to decide." Gideon looked down at their joined hands. Something in his expression cracked, just a little. Then he turned his hand over, laced his fingers through hers, and he didn't let go. That night, he didn't sleep on the floor. He didn't touch her. Didn't cross the invisible line she hadn't drawn, but he'd respect it anyway. But when Evelyn woke in the middle of the night, she could hear him breathing beside her. And for the first time since her father died, she didn't feel alone. But, to be continued, the second bounty hunter arrived on a Tuesday. Evelyn spotted him from the ridge where she'd been checking the snare traps Gideon had taught her to set. The man rode a gray mare and kept looking over his shoulder like he expected ghosts to follow him through the trees. Smart, she thought. This far up the mountain, ghosts were probably the least of his problems. She didn't run back to the cabin. Didn't panic. Just gathered the 2 rabbits she'd caught, reset the traps, and walked home at the same steady pace Gideon had drilled into her over the past 6 weeks. "Never run unless you're being chased," he'd told her. "Running makes you prey." When she pushed through the cabin door, Gideon was at the table sharpening his hunting knife. He looked up, read her face in half a second, and was on his feet before she'd closed the door behind her. "How many?" he asked. "1, maybe 2 miles out, coming from the South Pass." "Armed?" "Rifle. Didn't see a sidearm, but he probably has one." Gideon nodded, already moving toward the gun rack. "Good. You did good." The praise shouldn't have warmed her the way it did, but it had been like that lately. Small moments where Gideon's approval meant more than it should, more than she wanted to admit. "What do we do?" she asked. "We wait." "That's it?" "He's alone. Probably lost." Gideon checked the rifle's chamber, then set it by the door. "Give him an hour. If he finds us, we deal with it. If he doesn't, he'll freeze or fall off a cliff trying to get back down." Evelyn hung the rabbits by the door and crossed to the fire. Her hands were cold despite the gloves Gideon had made her from deer hide. She held them toward the flames, watching him from the corner of her eye. He'd changed in the weeks since their wedding, or maybe she'd just started seeing him differently. The hard edges were still there. The scars, the silences. The way he moved like violence was always an option. But underneath that, she'd found something else. Something careful, almost gentle. Like the way he'd started brewing her coffee exactly the way she liked it without her having to ask. Or how he always walked on the outside when they checked the trap line together, putting himself between her and whatever might be waiting in the trees. Or the way he'd spent 3 evenings carving her a comb from pine wood because she'd mentioned once, just once, that she missed being able to fix her hair properly. Small things. Things that mattered more than they should. "You're staring," Gideon said without looking up. Evelyn's cheeks flushed. "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." "I was just thinking." "About?" She hesitated, then decided honesty was easier than lying. "About how different you are from what people said." That made him look up. "Different how?" "They said you were a monster." "I am." "No." Evelyn shook her head. "Monsters don't teach their wives how to skin rabbits. They don't build them furniture or let them sleep in the only bed or—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "You're not what I expected." Gideon's expression went carefully blank. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone cruel, I guess. Someone who'd use me and throw me away when he got bored. Maybe I still will." But there was no conviction in his voice, just old fear dressed up as fact. Evelyn crossed the room and sat across from him at the table. "You won't. You sound pretty sure about that." "I am." "Why?" "Because every night for the past 2 weeks, he'd slept beside her without once crossing the space between them. Because he'd given her a weapon and taught her how to use it instead of keeping her defenseless. Because he looked at her like she was something worth protecting instead of something he owned. But she couldn't say any of that out loud. Not yet. So instead she said, "Because I'm still here." Gideon held her gaze for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. Something raw and uncertain and almost hopeful. Before he could respond, gunfire cracked through the trees. They were both moving before the echo faded. Gideon grabbed the rifle. Evelyn pulled the knife he'd given her from its sheath at her hip. They positioned themselves on either side of the door, listening. Silence. Then hoofbeats. Fast. Getting closer. "Stay behind me," Gideon murmured. "Like hell." He shot her a look. "Evelyn, we've been through this. I can handle myself." "That's not—" He stopped, cursed under his breath. "Fine. But if I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" She nodded. The hoofbeats stopped just outside the cabin. A man's voice called out, rough with pain. "Vale, I know you're in there." Gideon frowned. That voice didn't sound like a bounty hunter. It sounded familiar. He opened the door slowly, rifle raised. The man on horseback was bleeding from his shoulder, clutching the wound with one hand while the other held the reins. He was maybe 40, with a face Evelyn vaguely recognized from town. One of the lumber mill workers who'd looked away during the auction. Thomas Calloway. "What happened?" Gideon demanded. "Ambush," Thomas gasped. 3 men. They said Crowley sent them. Told them to burn out anyone helping you." He swayed in the saddle. "I tried to stop them. They shot me. I didn't know where else to go." Gideon lowered the rifle and moved toward the horse. "How many are still alive?" "All of them. I barely got away." "Where are they now?" "Headed for the widow Morrison's place. She's got kids, Vale. Little ones." Gideon's jaw tightened. He glanced back at Evelyn, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. The choice he didn't want to make. Stay and protect her, or go and protect people who turned their backs on him years ago. Evelyn made the decision for him. "Go," she said. "Evelyn, I'll be fine. I've got the rifle, the knife, and enough ammunition to hold off an army." She crossed to him, pressing the rifle into his hands. "Those kids need you more than I do right now." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." She met his eyes. "And so do you." For a second, she thought he'd argue, thought he'd refuse to leave her alone. Then he pulled her forward and kissed her, hard and fast and desperate, before letting go. "Bar the door," he said. "Don't open it for anyone but me." "How will I know it's you?" "I'll knock 3 times. Wait, then twice more." She nodded. Gideon turned to Thomas. "Can you ride?" "Barely." "Good enough." He grabbed his coat and a second rifle from the rack. Then he looked back at Evelyn one more time. "I'll be back before dark." "You better be." He almost smiled. Then he was gone, swinging up onto his horse and disappearing into the trees with Thomas struggling to keep pace behind him. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching until they vanished completely. Then she barred the door, loaded every gun in the cabin, and waited. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Evelyn tried to stay busy. She cleaned the rifles that didn't need cleaning, organized supplies that were already organized, paced the cabin until she'd memorized every knot in the floorboards. But mostly, she listened. Every crack of a branch made her reach for the rifle. Every wind gust sounded like footsteps. By the time the sun started sinking toward the horizon, her nerves were stripped raw. Gideon had said he'd be back before dark. The sky was already bleeding red. Evelyn forced herself to breathe. He was fine. He had to be fine. He'd survived 10 years alone on this mountain. 3 hired guns wouldn't be enough to stop him. But what if they were? What if he didn't come back? What if she'd sent him to his death? She was spiraling into panic when she heard it. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 more. Evelyn's heart leapt. She crossed to the door, fingers shaking as she lifted the bar. Gideon stood on the other side, covered in blood. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Are you hurt?" "Not my blood." Relief hit her so hard she almost collapsed. Instead, she grabbed his coat and pulled him inside, slamming the door shut behind him. "What happened?" Gideon set his rifle down carefully. "Widow Morrison and her kids are fine. The men who came for them aren't." "You killed them." It wasn't a question. 2 of them. 3rd one ran. He turned to look at her, and there was something haunted in his eyes. "I told you I was a monster." Evelyn stepped closer. "You protected children. That doesn't make you a monster." "I didn't hesitate. Didn't give them a chance to surrender." His voice dropped. "I just killed them." "Good." That surprised him. He stared at her like he'd never seen her before. Evelyn lifted her chin. "They came to burn out a widow and her children because a corrupt banker told them to. They deserved what they got." "You really believe that?" "Yes." Gideon exhaled slowly. Then, without warning, he pulled her against his chest and buried his face in her hair. Evelyn froze. They'd touched before. Brief moments, practical contact, but never like this. Never with his arms wrapped around her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Slowly, carefully, she brought her hands up to his back. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other while the mountain wind howled outside. When Gideon finally pulled back, his eyes were clearer, steadier. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not being afraid of me." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm terrified of you." That startled a rough laugh out of him. "Then why are you still here?" "Because I'm more terrified of being without you." The words hung between them, too honest, too raw, too real. Gideon's hand came up to cup her face. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and Evelyn's breath caught. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Do what?" "This. Us. Any of it." His jaw worked. "I've been alone for 10 years. I don't know how to let someone in. Then we'll figure it out together." He searched her face like he was looking for proof she meant it. Whatever he found must have been enough, because he leaned down and kissed her. Not like in the church. Not desperate or claiming. This was different, softer, like a question instead of a demand. Evelyn answered by kissing him back. They broke apart slowly. Gideon rested his forehead against hers, and Evelyn felt his heart hammering against her palm. "I need to clean up," he murmured. "Okay. And we need to talk about what happens next." "Okay." But neither of them moved. Finally, Gideon stepped back. Third bounty hunter ran straight back to Crowley. "He'll know where we are now. Really know." Evelyn nodded. She'd already figured that part out. "How long do we have?" "A week. Maybe less." He stripped off his blood-stained coat. "He'll send more men, better men. And eventually there'll be too many to fight off." "Yeah." Evelyn moved to the water basin and started heating water for him to wash. "So what do we do?" "We have 2 options. We run or we fight." "Running means leaving the cabin." "Leaving everything," Gideon corrected. "The traps, the supplies, the shelter. We'd be starting over somewhere else, and Crowley would still be out there, still looking. And fighting? Fighting means going back to Ash Creek, means confronting Crowley directly." He paused. Probably means one of us dies. Evelyn's hand stilled over the water pot. Those are terrible options. I know. There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't found it. She turned to face him. What would you do if I wasn't here? Gideon was quiet for a long time. Then, I'd kill Crowley. Then I'd disappear so far into the wilderness no one would ever find me again. Why don't you? Because you're here. His eyes met hers. And I'm not leaving you behind. Something cracked open in Evelyn's chest. She crossed to him, took his face in both hands, and kissed him like the world was ending. Maybe it was. When they finally came up for air, Gideon's voice was rough. We should eat. Get some rest. Figure this out in the morning. Okay. But that night, when they lay down in the bed they'd been sharing for 2 weeks, neither of them slept. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, listening to Gideon breathe beside her, and tried to imagine a future where they made it out of this alive. She couldn't. So instead she reached out in the darkness and found his hand. He laced his fingers through hers and held on, like she was the only real thing left in the world. And for now, that was enough. The wanted posters appeared 3 days later. Evelyn found them nailed to trees along the northern trap line, crude drawings of her face and Gideon's above bold letters screaming, "Kidnapped and murderer and reward." She ripped them down, every single one, and brought them back to the cabin in a crumpled pile. Gideon took one look and cursed. How many? 15 that I counted, probably more. He spread them out on the table, studying the text. 500 for you, 1,500 for me. That's a lot of money. That's enough money to bring every gun in 3 territories down on our heads. Evelyn sank into a chair. We can't stay here. No, we can't. And we can't run forever. No, we can't do that either. She looked up at him. So we fight. Gideon's expression went carefully neutral. You understand what that means? It means we go back to Ash Creek. We expose Crowley for what he is. We end this. She paused. And we probably die trying. Yeah. I'm still choosing it. Evelyn, I'm not spending the rest of my life running, Gideon. I won't do it. Her voice hardened. My father died because of that man. Dozens of other families lost everything because of him. Someone has to stop him. And you think that someone is us? I think we're the only ones angry enough to try. Gideon stared at her for a long moment. Then he started to laugh, low and rough and almost disbelieving. What? Evelyn demanded. Nothing, it's just... He shook his head. 6 weeks ago, you were terrified. Now you're ready to march into hell and pick a fight with the devil himself. 6 weeks ago, I didn't have a choice. Now I do. She stood, crossing to stand in front of him. And I choose you. I choose this. I choose fighting back. Something fierce and possessive flared in Gideon's eyes. You're sure? Completely. He pulled her against him and kissed her hard enough to bruise. When he pulled back, his voice was rough. Then we do this right. We plan. We prepare. And we don't go in blind. Agreed. And if it goes wrong, if we're about to get caught, you run. No arguments. Gideon, promise me, Evelyn. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wouldn't leave him behind no matter what. But the look in his eyes stopped her. I promise, she whispered. He nodded, then stepped back and started pulling maps from a chest in the corner. All right, let's figure out how to kill a banker. They spent the next week planning. Gideon knew Ash Creek better than Evelyn expected. He'd lived there before the land wars, had friends once, a life, a future. He'd lost all of it when the fighting started and the bodies piled up. Now he used that knowledge to map out every entrance, every back alley, every place Crowley might hide. He'll have guards, Gideon said, marking positions on the map. At least 6, maybe more. What about the sheriff? Crowley owns him. The judge? Dead. Died 2 years ago. New one's based in Silver Falls, only comes to Ash Creek once a month. Evelyn frowned. So there's no law? There's Crowley's law, that's it. She studied the map, tracing routes with her finger. What if we don't fight him directly? What if we prove what he did instead? How? Evidence. Documents. Something that proves he falsified my father's debts and stole from the town. Gideon considered that. Where would those documents be? His office, probably. In the bank. which will be locked and guarded. So we break in. He raised an eyebrow. You want to rob a bank?
I want to rob a thief. Evelyn's smile was sharp. There's a difference. Despite everything, Gideon laughed. When did you get so bloodthirsty? Around the time I married an outlaw. He pulled her close, and they spent the next hour going over details. Guard rotations, lock mechanisms, escape routes. By the time the sun set, they had something resembling a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was all they had.
That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay beside Gideon, listening to the wind tear at the cabin walls, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. You awake? Gideon's voice was quiet in the darkness. Yeah. Scared. Terrified. He rolled onto his side, facing her. We don't have to do this. We could still run. Head north, cross into Canada, start over. You don't want that. I want you alive. Evelyn turned to face him. In the faint moonlight filtering through the window, she could just make out his features, the hard line of his jaw, the scar cutting through his eyebrow, the eyes that had seen too much violence. I'm not running anymore, she said softly. Not from Crowley, not from this life, not from you. Gideon's hand found hers under the blanket. I don't deserve you. Probably not. That startled a laugh out of him. Honest. You wanted honesty. She squeezed his hand. Here's some more. I was scared of you at first. Scared you'd hurt me. Scared you'd use me and throw me away. And now? Now I'm scared of losing you. Gideon's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. You won't. You can't promise that. No. But I can promise I'll fight like hell to make sure it doesn't happen. Evelyn shifted closer until her forehead rested against his chest. His heartbeat was steady under her ear, strong and sure and real. When this is over, she whispered, what do we do? What do you want to do? She thought about it. I want to come back here, to the cabin. I want to fix it up properly, maybe add a room or two. I want to plant a garden in the spring. I want to learn how to tan hides and make soap and all the things frontier women are supposed to know how to do. She paused. I want to build a life with you. Gideon was very still. Then, that sounds good. Yeah? Yeah. They lay there in the darkness, holding each other while the mountain wind sang its lonely song outside. And for the first time since this whole mess started, Evelyn let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd actually survive this. They left at dawn. Gideon helped Evelyn pack light, just weapons, supplies, and the documents they'd need to prove her identity. Everything else stayed behind. The cabin looked small as they rode away from it. Fragile. Like something that might not be there when they got back. If they got back. Evelyn didn't look over her shoulder. Looking back felt like admitting they might not make it. The ride down the mountain took most of the day. They moved carefully, avoiding main trails, sticking to paths only Gideon knew. By the time Ash Creek came into view, the sun was setting. The town looked exactly the same. Same buildings, same streets, same people going about their lives like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Evelyn Hart had left this place as a terrified girl being sold to the highest bidder. She was coming back as someone else entirely. They stopped on the ridge overlooking the town. Gideon pulled out a spyglass and scanned the streets below. 3 guards at the bank, he reported. 2 at Crowley's house. 1 patrolling. 6 total, like you thought. Yeah. He lowered the spyglass. We wait until full dark, then we move. Evelyn nodded. They made camp in a shallow cave just below the ridgeline, close enough to watch the town, but far enough away to stay hidden. As night fell, Gideon went over the plan one more time. You go in through the back. The lock's old. You should be able to pick it with the tools I gave you. Once you're inside, find Crowley's office. It'll be on the 2nd floor northwest corner. Look for ledgers, contracts, anything with your father's name on it. What will you be doing? Creating a distraction. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What kind of distraction? The loud kind. Gideon, I'll be fine. Just get in, get the evidence, and get out. I'll meet you at the livery stable on the east side of town. And if you don't? His jaw tightened. Then you ride north and don't look back. I'm not leaving without you. Evelyn? No. She grabbed his coat, forcing him to look at her. We do this together, or not at all. For a second, she thought he'd argue. Then he pulled her forward and kissed her, desperate and fierce and full of everything they hadn't said yet. When they broke apart, his voice was rough. Together, together, she agreed. They waited until the town settled into sleep. Then Gideon checked his guns one last time, and they started down the ridge. Ash Creek spread out below them like a trap waiting to spring, and they walked straight into it anyway. The back door of Crowley's bank had a lock that looked like it hadn't been replaced since the building went up 15 years ago. Evelyn crouched in the alley, working the pick tools Gideon had made from bent nails and wire, and tried to keep her hands from shaking. Across town, an explosion shattered the night. Every dog in Ash Creek started barking at once. Voices rose in confusion. Boots hammered against wooden sidewalks as guards ran toward the sound, toward whatever hell Gideon had just unleashed on the north end of town. The lock clicked open. Evelyn slipped inside and eased the door shut behind her. The bank's back room was dark, except for moonlight filtering through a grimy window. She waited, letting her eyes adjust, listening for any sound that meant she wasn't alone. Nothing. She moved toward the stairs, each footstep careful and deliberate. Gideon had drilled this into her during the ride down. Slow was smooth, smooth was fast, fast got you killed. The stairs creaked under her weight. She froze, counting heartbeats, waiting for someone to come investigate. Still nothing. The second-floor hallway stretched ahead of her, lined with closed doors. Northwest corner, Gideon had said. She counted doors until she found the right one. It wasn't locked. That should have been her first warning. Evelyn pushed the door open and stepped into Walter Crowley's private office. A massive desk dominated the room, surrounded by filing cabinets and shelves stuffed with ledgers. Moonlight spilled across papers scattered on the desk surface. Contracts, deeds, letters bearing official seals. She crossed to the desk and started searching. Her father's name had to be here somewhere. Proof of what Crowley had done. Evidence that would stand up in a territorial court. She found it in the third drawer down. A ledger marked Hart Samuel, accounts receivable. She flipped it open, scanning the entries by matchlight. The original debt was there, $500, just like she remembered. But below it, someone had added lines in different ink. Interest charges that didn't match the signed contract. Penalty fees for late payments her father had never missed. Adjustments and amendments that tripled the debt in a matter of weeks. All of it falsified. All of it in Crowley's handwriting. Evelyn's hands shook as she turned the pages. There were other names too, dozens of them. Families she knew. People who'd lost farms, businesses, homes. Every single one showed the same pattern. Legitimate debts transformed into impossible burdens through fraud and forgery. She grabbed the ledger and kept searching. More documents surfaced. A letter from the Territorial Land Office questioning several property transfers. A notice from the bank examiner's office that had been intercepted before it reached its destination. A contract bearing a dead man's signature dated 3 months after his burial. This was it. This was everything they needed. So, Evelyn stuffed papers inside her coat, working fast now, adrenaline overriding caution. Another explosion echoed from across town, closer this time. Gideon was running out of distractions. She needed to move. That's when she found the hidden compartment. It was built into the back of the bottom drawer, accessible only if you knew to pull the whole drawer out and reach behind it. Her fingers brushed metal. She pulled out a small lockbox, forced it open with her knife, and found herself staring at a stack of letters bound with string. The top one was addressed to someone named Henry Marsh in Silver Falls. She didn't recognize the name, but something about it felt important. She untied the string and read the first letter. Her blood turned to ice. The letter was from a bank clerk named Joseph Webb, a name she vaguely remembered hearing around town before he died in a riding accident 2 years ago. Except according to this letter, dated 3 days before his death, Webb hadn't been planning any riding trips. He'd been planning to report Crowley to federal authorities for embezzlement, fraud, and murder. Murder. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read further. Webb described how Crowley had arranged her father's death, how Samuel Hart had discovered the fraud and threatened to expose it, how Crowley had hired a man to sabotage the scaffolding at the mill where her father worked. The accident that killed him hadn't been an accident at all. It had been murder. And Crowley had gotten away with it because Joseph Webb died in a convenient riding accident before he could report what he knew. Evelyn couldn't breathe. The room tilted.
She grabbed the desk to steady herself, rage and grief warring in her chest. Her father had been murdered, and everyone had just accepted it. She stuffed the letters inside her coat with the other documents, hands shaking so badly she could barely manage it. She needed to get out, needed to find Gideon, needed to... The office door opened. Evelyn spun around, reaching for the knife at her hip.
Sheriff Maddox stood in the doorway, a lantern in one hand and a gun in the other. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, more tired, but his eyes were sharp as he took in her presence, the open drawers, the papers stuffed inside her coat. "Miss Hart," he said quietly. "Or I suppose it's Mrs. Vale now." Evelyn's hand closed around her knife handle. "Sheriff?"
"I'd ask what you're doing here, but I think that's pretty obvious." He gestured at her coat. "You find what you were looking for? Stay back." He didn't move. "I'm not going to hurt you." "You work for Crowley." "I work for Ash Creek." His expression was impossible to read. "Those aren't always the same thing." "You let him sell me like livestock." Maddox flinched. "I did, and I've regretted it every day since." "Regret doesn't fix anything."
"No, it doesn't." He lowered the gun slightly, not holstering it, but not aiming it at her either. "But maybe this does." He pulled something from his coat pocket and tossed it onto the desk between them. A second ledger. Smaller than the one she'd found, but clearly from the same set. "What is this?" Evelyn asked. "Insurance. Webb gave it to me the day before he died. Made me promise to keep it safe until someone came looking for the truth." Maddox's jaw tightened. "I've been waiting 2 years." Evelyn stared at him. "You knew? This whole time you knew what Crowley did?" "Suspected. Couldn't prove it. And even if I could..." He gestured helplessly. "Crowley owns the judge. Owns half the territorial government. A small-town sheriff can't touch him." "Then why give this to me?" "Because you're not trying to arrest him. You're trying to destroy him." Something almost like hope flickered in Maddox's eyes. "And that I can help with." Outside, gunfire erupted. Close. Too close. Evelyn grabbed the ledger. "I need to go. There's a judge coming through Silver Falls. Territorial circuit judge appointed by the federal government. He'll be there in 3 days." Maddox spoke quickly. "If you can get this evidence to him, he can issue warrants that even Crowley can't dodge." 3 days is a long time. It's the best chance you've got." More gunfire, shouting. The whole town was waking up now. "Which way out?" Evelyn demanded. "Backstairs, through the alley, head east toward the livery. Vale's already there. I saw him 10 minutes ago." She started for the door, then stopped. "Why are you helping us?" Maddox was quiet for a long moment. "Because I've got a daughter your age. And if Crowley ever looked at her the way he looked at you..." His voice went hard. "I'd want someone to help her too." Evelyn nodded once. Then she ran. The back stairs were narrow and steep. She took them 2 at a time, clutching the documents to her chest. Behind her, she heard Maddox shouting something about an intruder heading south, buying her time by sending Crowley's men in the wrong direction. She hit the alley at a dead sprint. The livery stable was 3 blocks east. She could make it. She just had to... A hand grabbed her arm and yanked her into a doorway. Evelyn screamed, reaching for her knife, but the hand clamped over her mouth. "It's me." Gideon's voice, rough and urgent. "It's me." Relief flooded through her. She sagged against him, and he wrapped one arm around her waist, keeping her upright. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded against his hand. He let go, and she gasped. "I got it. All of it. The evidence, the letters, everything." "Good. We need to move." "Maddox helped me. He said there's a judge in Silver Falls." "Later." Gideon pulled her deeper into the shadows as boots thundered past. "Right now, we run." They made it 2 more blocks before the ambush hit. 6 men materialized from side streets and doorways, forming a loose circle around them. All armed, all wearing the hard expressions of men who'd been paid well to bring in a fugitive. Gideon pushed Evelyn behind him. "Stay close. There's too many..." "I know." The biggest one stepped forward, a man with a scar bisecting his face and a smile that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Gideon Vale. Been a long time." "Not long enough, Carver." Carver's smile widened. "Crowley's offering $2,500 for you now, dead or alive. Personally, I'm hoping for dead." "You can try." "Oh, I intend to." He gestured at the other men. Take him. Bring the woman to Crowley. They moved as one. Gideon was faster. He pulled both guns in a movement so smooth it looked like magic and fired twice. Two men dropped before anyone else could react. Then he was moving, using Evelyn as a pivot point, keeping her behind him while he engaged the others. Evelyn fumbled for her own gun, but her hands were shaking too badly. She'd practiced shooting targets on the mountain. Never people. Never this close. One of the men broke past Gideon's defense, lunging for her. Instinct took over. Evelyn pulled her knife and slashed upward. The blade caught the man across the forearm. He screamed, stumbling back. Run! Gideon roared. Evelyn ran. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Away from the guns and the blood and the way Gideon fought like something feral and deadly. She made it half a block before someone tackled her from behind. They hit the ground hard. Air exploded from Evelyn's lungs. The documents scattered across the street. She tried to scream, but the man's weight crushed her chest. Got you, he breathed in her ear. Then his weight disappeared. Gideon hauled the man off her and drove a fist into his face with enough force to crack bone. The man dropped like a stone. Get up! Gideon pulled Evelyn to her feet. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. Get the papers. Move! Evelyn scrambled to gather the scattered documents while Gideon stood over her, reloading his guns with practiced efficiency. More men were coming. She could hear them shouting, organizing, cutting off escape routes. This way! Gideon grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a narrow gap between buildings. They squeezed through just as gunfire tore chunks from the wall behind them. The alley opened onto another street. Gideon scanned it quickly, then cursed. What? Evelyn gasped. We're cut off. They've got the east side blocked. What do we do? His jaw tightened. We go north, into the woods. That'll take us away from the horses. I know. They ran anyway. The north edge of town dissolved into scrub brush and pine trees. Evelyn's lungs burned. Her legs felt like they'd been filled with lead. But Gideon's hand stayed locked around hers, pulling her forward, refusing to let her fall behind. Behind them, voices coordinated. Torches appeared, spreading out in a search pattern. They were being hunted. Gideon pulled her into a drainage ditch and they collapsed, gasping. He pressed a finger to his lips. Evelyn nodded, trying to muffle her breathing. Torchlight passed overhead. Boots crunched through dead leaves. Someone swore about losing the trail. They waited until the sounds faded. Then Gideon helped Evelyn out of the ditch. Can you keep going? He asked quietly. Yes. Even if I can't? Her heart stopped. What? He touched his side. His hand came away dark with blood. You're shot, Evelyn whispered. Grazed. I'll live. Gideon, I said I'll live. His voice went hard. But we need to get out of here. Now. They moved deeper into the woods, Gideon leaning more heavily on her with each step. The wound was worse than he'd admitted. She could feel warm wetness soaking through his coat where she supported him. After what felt like hours, they stumbled into a small clearing. Gideon sat down heavily against a tree trunk. We rest here, he said, just for a minute. Evelyn knelt beside him, pulling open his coat. The wound ran along his ribs, deep enough to bleed badly, but the bullet had passed through. That was good. That meant no lead poisoning. She tore strips from her undershirt and packed the wound as best she could. Gideon hissed, but didn't pull away. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For getting you shot. He caught her hand. You didn't get me shot, Crowley did. His thumb brushed her knuckles. And this isn't over yet. How can you say that? We lost the horses. You're bleeding. Half the town is hunting us. We've got the evidence. What good is evidence if we're dead? Then we make sure we're not dead. He pulled her closer until their foreheads touched. You still have the documents? She nodded. Then we still have a chance. We just have to make it to Silver Falls. That's 3 days' ride. So we walk. Evelyn wanted to scream or cry or both. You can barely stand. I've done worse with worse injuries. This isn't the time for heroics. This is exactly the time. Gideon's voice was fierce. Your father died because of that man. Webb died. How many others? How many families destroyed? His hand tightened on hers. We're finishing this. One way or another. Evelyn looked at him, at the blood soaking through makeshift bandages, at the exhaustion lining his face. at the absolute certainty in his eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. "Together," she said. "Together." They rested until dawn started graying the eastern sky. Then Gideon got to his feet, swaying only slightly, and they started walking. The next 2 days blurred into an endless cycle of walking, hiding, and walking some more. They moved mostly at night, sleeping in shifts during the day. Gideon's wound stopped bleeding, but infection was setting in. Evelyn could see it in the way he moved, hear it in his labored breathing. He never complained. They ate what they could find: wild onions, pine nuts, a rabbit Gideon managed to snare despite his injury. Water came from streams, sleep came in stolen minutes. On the second night, fever hit him hard. Evelyn woke to find him shivering despite the small fire she'd risked building. She crawled over, pressing her hand to his forehead. He was burning up. "Gideon." She shook his shoulder. "Gideon, wake up." His eyes opened, unfocused. "Evelyn?" "I'm here." "Where's here?" "About a day from Silver Falls, maybe less." She tried to keep the fear out of her voice. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot." "Funny." He managed a weak smile. Then his expression turned serious. "If I don't make it, don't. Listen to me." He grabbed her hand. "If I don't make it, you take those documents and you keep going. Find the judge. Make sure Crowley pays." "I'm not leaving you." "Evelyn saw—" "No." Her voice cracked. "I didn't come this far, didn't fight this hard, just to lose you now. So you're going to get up, you're going to walk, and we're going to finish this together." Gideon stared at her. Then, impossibly, he laughed. "Yes, ma'am." She helped him sit up, forced water down his throat, checked his wound. The infection was bad, but not as bad as it could have been. He'd live, if they kept moving. By the third day, Silver Falls appeared on the horizon. Evelyn had never been so relieved to see a town in her life. They stumbled down the main street like drunks, Gideon leaning heavily on her shoulder, both of them filthy and exhausted. People stared. "Where's the courthouse?" Evelyn asked a woman sweeping her porch. The woman pointed wordlessly down the street. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building at the center of town. Evelyn half-dragged Gideon up the steps and through the heavy wooden doors. A clerk looked up from his desk, eyes widening. "Can I help you?" "We need to see the territorial judge," Evelyn said. "Now." "The judge is in session. Eat." "I don't care." She pulled the documents from her coat and slammed them on the desk. "These prove that Walter Crowley of Ash Creek has been embezzling, falsifying documents, and committing murder. We need to see the judge before Crowley's men find us." The clerk stared at the papers, then at Evelyn, then at Gideon, who looked half dead and entirely dangerous. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared through a side door. 5 minutes later, they were standing in front of Judge Samuel Morrison, a stern-faced man in his 60s with sharp eyes and sharper questions. Evelyn laid everything out: the falsified debts, the forged contracts, Webb's letters detailing the murder of her father, the second ledger Maddox had given her, documenting years of systematic fraud. Morrison listened without interrupting. When she finished, he picked up Webb's letters and read them twice. "These are serious accusations," he said finally. "They're true. If they are, Walter Crowley will face federal charges. But I'll need time to verify—" "We don't have time." Gideon's voice was rough. "His men are hunting us. They'll be here by nightfall." Morrison studied him. "You're Gideon Vale." "Yes." "There are wanted posters with your name on them." "Those were issued by Crowley's pet sheriff, not federal authorities." Morrison's eyebrow rose. "Is that so?" "Check your records," Evelyn said. "The federal government has no warrants for Gideon Vale. Crowley manufactured them to justify the hunt." Morrison steepled his fingers. "This is quite the story, Mrs. Vale." "It's the truth." He studied them both for a long moment. Then he stood. "Wait here." He disappeared into a back room. They could hear him talking to someone, papers shuffling. Gideon swayed. Evelyn caught him, easing him into a chair. "Almost done," she whispered. "Yeah. You did good." "We did good." Morrison returned with a stack of official-looking papers. "I've reviewed what you've given me. I'm prepared to issue immediate warrants for Walter Crowley's arrest on charges of fraud, embezzlement, falsifying official documents, and conspiracy to commit murder." Relief hit Evelyn so hard she nearly collapsed. However, Morrison continued, enforcing those warrants will require federal marshals. The nearest detachment is in Fort Collins, 4 days' ride from here. 4 days? Evelyn's stomach dropped. Crowley could disappear by then, which is why I'm sending a telegram immediately. I'll also contact the territorial governor's office. Morrison's expression was grim. But Mrs. Vale, you need to understand, until federal authorities arrive, you and your husband are still in danger. Crowley has resources, money, men willing to kill for him. So what do we do? Stay here. Under my protection, I'll arrange lodging and medical care. He glanced at Gideon. Your husband needs a doctor. Evelyn looked at Gideon. His eyes had closed, and his breathing was shallow. Please, she said. Morrison nodded. I'll send for Dr. Hendricks immediately. The next few hours passed in a blur. A doctor examined Gideon, cleaned and properly dressed his wound, and declared that he'd probably survive as long as the fever broke. Evelyn sat beside his bed in a room above the general store, holding his hand while he drifted in and out of consciousness. Morrison's deputy stood guard outside. As night fell, Evelyn finally let herself believe they might actually survive this. Then the door opened. She spun around, reaching for her knife. Sheriff Maddox stood in the doorway, hands raised. Easy. What are you doing here? Came to warn you. He glanced at the deputy, who'd followed him in. Crowley knows you're here. He's coming. Evelyn's blood ran cold. How many men? 12, maybe more. They'll be here by morning. Morrison's sending for federal marshals. Won't get here in time. Maddox crossed to the window, looking out at the darkened street. Crowley's planning to hit you before they arrive. Kill you both, destroy the evidence, and disappear before anyone can stop him. Then what do we do? Maddox turned to face her. We fight. We? I'm done standing by while that man destroys lives. His jaw set. I should have stopped him years ago. I'm stopping him now. Evelyn looked at Gideon, still unconscious, then at Maddox, then at the deputy, who nodded grimly. Tell me the plan, she said. They fortified the general store like it was the last building on Earth. Maddox organized it with the efficiency of someone who'd planned for this moment longer than he'd admit. The deputy, a young man named Carter, who looked barely old enough to shave, moved furniture to block ground floor windows while Evelyn helped barricade the back door with feed sacks and crates. They'll come at dawn, Maddox said, positioning rifles at strategic windows. Crowley likes his work visible, wants the whole town watching when he wins. He's not going to win, Evelyn said. Maddox glanced at her. You sound pretty certain about that. I am. Behind them, Gideon stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused and fever-bright. Evelyn? She crossed to the bed immediately, pressing her palm to his forehead, still burning. I'm here. What's happening? Crowley's coming. We're getting ready. He tried to sit up, made it about 6 inches before his strength gave out. You need to rest. She pushed him back down gently. Let me handle this. Like hell. Gideon, I'm not lying here while you fight my battles. He grabbed her wrist, his grip weaker than it should have been. Help me up. You can barely stand. Then I'll shoot sitting down. Evelyn looked into his eyes and saw the same stubborn determination that had carried him through 10 years alone on that mountain. The same refusal to quit that had made him walk into that church and claim her in front of everyone. He wasn't going to stay in bed, not while she was in danger. Fine, she said. But if you pass out, I'm dragging you back here and tying you down. Fair. She helped him to a chair by the second-floor window. Maddox brought him a rifle and a box of ammunition without comment. Outside, Silver Falls was waking up. Shop owners swept porches. A milk wagon rattled past. Everything looked normal. It wouldn't stay that way. How many people know we're here? Evelyn asked. Too many, Maddox said. Judge Morrison's trying to keep it quiet, but word spreads. Someone probably sent Crowley a telegram the second you walked into that courthouse. So we wait. We wait. The hours crawled. Evelyn checked weapons, rechecked them, then checked them again just to have something to do with her hands. Gideon dozed in the chair, rifle across his lap, looking like he might fall over any second. Carter paced the ground floor, nervous energy radiating off him in waves. Only Maddox seemed calm. He sat by the front window, watching the street with the patience of someone who'd spent a lifetime waiting for violence. You don't have to do this, Evelyn said quietly. Yeah, I do. Why?
He was silent for a long time. Then, I had a brother, Thomas, younger than me by 5 years, smartest person I ever knew. His voice went flat. 10 years ago, he borrowed money from Crowley to start a printing business. Same story as your father. Reasonable debt turned impossible overnight. Thomas tried to fight it, tried to prove the fraud. What happened?
He hung himself in his print shop. Maddox's jaw tightened. At least, that's what the inquest said. But I saw the body. Saw the bruises around his throat that didn't match a rope. Saw his broken fingers. Evelyn's stomach turned. Crowley killed him. Made it look like suicide, and I... His voice cracked. I was already sheriff. Already knew Crowley owned half the territory. Already knew I couldn't prove anything. So I did nothing. That's why you helped us. That's why I should have helped years ago. He finally looked at her. I can't bring Thomas back. Can't fix what I let happen. But maybe I can stop it from happening again. Before Evelyn could respond, Carter called up from below. Riders coming, East Road. They all moved to windows. A dozen men rode into Silver Falls like they owned it. Crowley led them, dressed in his expensive suit, sitting his horse like he was arriving for a business meeting instead of a murder. Behind him came Carver and the other hired guns, all armed to the teeth. They stopped in the middle of the street. Crowley dismounted slowly, adjusting his coat. I know you're in there, Mrs. Vale. His voice carried clearly in the morning air. You and that animal you married. Gideon's hand tightened on his rifle. Evelyn put her hand over his. Come out now, Crowley continued. We'll make this quick. You have my word. His word, Gideon muttered. That's worth about as much as mud. Maddox leaned out the window. Crowley, leave town. You're done. Crowley's expression didn't change. Sheriff Maddox, I'm disappointed. I thought you understood your place. My place is upholding the law, and the law says you're under arrest. On whose authority? Territorial Judge Morrison's. Federal warrants are being issued as we speak. That got a reaction. Crowley's face tightened. I see. So leave, Maddox said. While you still can. Crowley looked at the general store, at the barricaded windows, at the rifles visible in the openings. Then he smiled. I don't think so. He gestured to his men. They spread out, taking positions behind water troughs, hitching posts, anything that provided cover. Carver moved toward a side alley. 2 others circled toward the back. They're flanking us, Carter called. Let them, Gideon said. Just means we know where they are. Crowley raised his voice again. Last chance, Mrs. Vale. Come out, give me the documents, and I'll let you live. You have my word. Evelyn stood leaning into the window so he could see her clearly. Your word killed my father. Your father was a fool who didn't understand how business works. He understood you're a thief and a murderer. Her voice shook with rage. And everyone's going to know it. No. Crowley's smile vanished. They're not. He nodded to Carver. The first shot shattered the window 6 inches from Evelyn's head. She dropped, glass raining over her. Gideon returned fire immediately, his shot punching through the water trough Carver was hiding behind. The big man yelped and scrambled for better cover. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Bullets tore through the building's wooden walls. The front window exploded. Carter fired back from the ground floor, his rifle barking steadily. Evelyn crawled to another window, raised her rifle, and fired at a man trying to reach the back door. She missed, but it was close enough to make him dive for cover. Conserve ammunition, Maddox shouted over the chaos. Make every shot count. Easy for him to say. Evelyn's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle steady. Beside her, Gideon fired with mechanical precision. Even fever-sick and injured, his aim was deadly. 3 shots, 3 men scrambling for different positions. But there were too many of them, and they had too much ammunition. The assault went on for what felt like hours. Fire and return fire. Reload. Fire again. The air filled with gun smoke and the smell of splintered wood. Then someone threw a torch. It arced through the broken window and landed on a pile of fabric in the corner. Flames spread immediately. Fire! Carter yelled. Evelyn grabbed a blanket and tried to smother the flames, but they'd already caught on the dry wood. Smoke billowed up, making her eyes water. We need to move, Maddox said. Where? Gideon demanded. They've got us surrounded. Back room. There's a cellar entrance. We can... The front door exploded inward. Two of Crowley's men rushed through, guns blazing. Carter took a bullet in the shoulder and went down hard. Maddox fired twice, dropping one attacker, but the second made it to the stairs. Evelyn shot him. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The man fell backward, hit the bottom step, and didn't move. She stared at what she'd done. She'd killed someone. Evelyn, Gideon's voice cut through the shock. Look at me. She turned. You did good, he said. Now help me with Carter. The younger deputy was conscious but bleeding badly. They half carried him toward the back room while Maddox covered their retreat, firing steadily at the shapes moving outside. The cellar entrance was hidden under a trap door. Gideon pulled it open with his good arm while Evelyn and Maddox lowered Carter through. You next, Gideon told her. Not without you. I'm right behind you. She didn't believe him, but there wasn't time to argue. She dropped into the cellar, landing in cold darkness that smelled like earth and old potatoes. Maddox came next, then Gideon, moving slower than he should have been. Above them, the building burned. The cellar had one exit, a narrow tunnel that led to the alley behind the store. They crawled through it single file, Carter groaning with each movement. Gideon's breathing labored behind her. They emerged into chaos. Silver Falls was awake now, people running in every direction, some trying to fight the fire, others fleeing from the gunfight. Smoke billowed into the sky, and Crowley's men were everywhere. This way, Maddox hissed, leading them between buildings. They made it half a block before Carver stepped out in front of them. He had a gun pointed at Evelyn's chest. Going somewhere? Gideon moved faster than should have been possible. He slammed into Carver, driving them both against the wall. The gun went off, the bullet screaming past Evelyn's ear. Then they were fighting. Gideon was sick, injured, running on nothing but fury and desperation. But Carver was fresh and strong and brutal. They crashed through a fence, rolled across the dirt, came up swinging. Evelyn raised her rifle, but couldn't get a clear shot. They were moving too fast, too close together. Carver got Gideon in a headlock. Should have stayed dead, Vale. Gideon drove an elbow into his ribs. Once, twice. Carver's grip loosened. Then Gideon twisted, breaking free, and grabbed Carver's gun hand. They struggled for control of the weapon. The gun fired. Both men froze. Then Carver collapsed. Gideon stood over him, gasping, covered in blood, his own and Carver's. He swayed. Evelyn caught him before he fell. I've got you. Can't. His voice was barely a whisper. Can't keep going. Yes, you can. She pulled his arm over her shoulders, taking his weight. You're going to stay on your feet. You're going to keep fighting, because I need you. He looked at her, eyes glassy with fever and pain. Evelyn, don't you dare give up on me now. Something in her voice reached him. He straightened slightly, bearing more of his own weight. Maddox appeared beside them. Courthouse. Morrison's gathered armed citizens. We can make a stand there. They ran, or tried to. Gideon could barely walk. Carter was worse, leaving a blood trail behind them. But they kept moving, Maddox clearing the path ahead, Evelyn keeping Gideon upright through sheer, stubborn will. The courthouse steps appeared ahead. So did Walter Crowley. He stood between them and safety, flanked by 4 remaining gunmen. His suit was dirty now, his face flushed with rage. Enough, he said. They stopped. You've destroyed my building, killed my men, made a mockery of everything I built. Crowley's voice shook. I should have killed you in that church, girl. Should have put a bullet in you the second you opened your mouth. But you didn't, Evelyn said, and now everyone knows what you are. They know nothing. They know everything. She gestured at the growing crowd, townspeople watching from doorways and windows drawn by the fire and gunshots. Judge Morrison has your ledgers, your forged documents, letters proving you murdered my father and Joseph Webb. It's over, Crowley. It's over when I say it's over. He raised his gun, aimed at Evelyn, and Judge Morrison stepped between them. The old judge stood on the courthouse steps, unarmed, flanked by a dozen Silver Falls citizens holding rifles. Lower your weapon, Mr. Crowley, Morrison said calmly. Step aside. I will not. Then I'll shoot through you. Do that, and these men will kill you where you stand. Morrison gestured at the armed townspeople. Federal marshals are 2 hours away. You can surrender now and face trial, or you can die in the street. Your choice. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Crowley's face. He looked at his 4 remaining men. They looked back nervously, clearly doing the math. 4 against a dozen, maybe more, as other townspeople emerged with weapons. The odds had shifted. Slowly, Crowley lowered his gun. "You're making a mistake, Morrison. The only mistake was letting you operate this long." Morrison nodded to 2 of the armed citizens. "Disarm them. Place them in custody." The men moved forward. Crowley's hired guns surrendered without resistance, but Crowley himself stood rigid, fury radiating off him like heat. "This isn't finished," he said, looking straight at Evelyn. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." The federal marshals arrived 3 hours later. By then, the fire was out, the dead had been counted, and Walter Crowley sat in a cell beneath the courthouse, staring at walls that would hold him until his trial. Evelyn watched them load him into a prison wagon, chains on his wrists and ankles. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her at all. Good. She was done with him seeing her as anything. Gideon was upstairs in the doctor's office, finally getting proper care. The fever had broken during the fight, adrenaline burning through infection like fire through kindling. Dr. Hendricks said he'd live, though it would take weeks to fully recover. Evelyn sat beside his bed, holding his hand, watching him sleep. "You should rest too," Judge Morrison said from the doorway. "I can't." "Because you'll dream?" She looked up at him. "How did you know?" "I've seen enough violence to recognize the look." He stepped into the room. "What you did today, stopping Crowley, exposing his crimes, that took remarkable courage. It took desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing." He pulled a chair over and sat. "The marshals will need your testimony. Probably your husband's too once he's well enough. The trial will be in federal court. Could take months." "We'll be there." Morrison nodded. "I've also spoken with the territorial governor's office. The charges against your husband, the wanted posters Crowley issued, they're being formally dismissed. Gideon Vale is no longer a fugitive." Relief washed through Evelyn. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank the truth." He stood. "Get some rest, Mrs. Vale. You've earned it." After he left, Evelyn sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. Her father was dead. Webb was dead. Carter might lose his arm. The general store was a burned shell. Men had died today, some by her hand. But Crowley was in custody. The fraud was exposed, and the nightmare was finally over. Gideon's hand tightened on hers, his eyes opened, clearer than they'd been in days. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself. We win. We won." A smile ghosted across his face. "Good." Then he pulled her down and kissed her, soft and careful and full of everything they'd fought for. When they broke apart, Evelyn rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" "Now we go home." "To the mountain?" "If you still want to." She thought about the cabin, the wilderness, the quiet life they'd started building before all this began. "Yeah," she said, "I still want to. Even knowing what I am, what I've done, I know exactly what you are." She cupped his face. "You're the man who gave me a choice when no one else would. Who taught me to survive. Who fought beside me even when you could barely stand." Her voice softened. "You're my husband, and I love you." Gideon went very still. "Say that again." "I love you." His hand came up to cover hers. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not." That surprised a laugh out of him. "Honest to the end." "You wanted honesty." "Yeah, I did." He pulled her closer. "I love you too, in case that wasn't obvious." It was a little obvious. They stayed like that, holding each other while the town recovered around them, while justice finally caught up to the man who'd destroyed so many lives, while the future they'd fought for became real. 3 weeks later, they rode back toward Black Hollow Ridge. Gideon was still healing, but strong enough to sit a horse. The wound had scarred clean, and his fever hadn't returned. Dr. Hendricks had declared him fit for travel with strict instructions to take it easy. Evelyn had smiled and nodded and known full well Gideon would ignore most of that advice. They stopped on the ridge overlooking Ash Creek one last time. The town looked smaller from this height, less threatening. Just a collection of buildings where people lived their lives, trying to survive like everyone else. Sheriff Maddox had been appointed temporary administrator while the territorial government sorted out Crowley's assets. He'd promised to make sure the stolen properties were returned to their rightful owners, the falsified debts erased, the damage repaired as much as possible. It wouldn't bring back the dead, but it was something. "You okay?" Gideon asked. Evelyn thought about her father, about the life she'd lost, about the terrified girl who'd stood at that altar 2 months ago. "Yeah," she said. "I am." They rode on. The cabin was exactly as they'd left it. Snow had drifted against the door, but the structure was sound. The barn still stood. The clearing was undisturbed except for deer tracks. Home. They spent the next few days cleaning, repairing, settling back into the rhythms they'd been forced to abandon. Gideon checked the trap lines while Evelyn inventoried their food supplies. They worked side by side, comfortable in the silence, comfortable with each other. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Evelyn found herself standing at the cliff edge, looking out over the wilderness. Gideon joined her. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything." She leaned against him. "How different my life is now, how different I am." "Better or worse?" "Different." She considered. "I was supposed to marry some merchant or farmer, have children, live a quiet life in town." "You still could, if you wanted." She looked up at him. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to be happy." "That's not an answer." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want you here, with me, building something that's ours." His arm tightened around her. "But if you need more than this, I don't." She turned to face him fully. "I don't need town life or society or any of that. I just need this. You. Us." "You're sure?" "Completely." He kissed her, slow and deep, until the sunset painted everything gold. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn said, "I was thinking about adding a room to the cabin. Maybe 2. Planning on expanding?" "Eventually." She pressed her hand to her stomach, where the first flutter of possibility was just beginning. "I think we might need the space." Gideon followed her gesture. Understanding dawned slowly, then hit like lightning. Maybe. It's too early to know for sure." She bit her lip. "How do you feel about that?" He didn't answer with words, just picked her up and spun her around, careful despite his enthusiasm, and when he set her down, his eyes were bright. "I feel like the luckiest man alive," he said. They stood there on the ridge as night fell, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it into something beautiful. Not perfect, never perfect, but real. And theirs. Below them, the mountains stretched endlessly into darkness. Above, stars began appearing one by one. And on Black Hollow Ridge, where a killer had once lived alone, a family was beginning. Winter came early that year, burying Black Hollow Ridge under 3 feet of snow before October ended. Evelyn stood at the cabin window, watching the world turn white, and pressed a hand to her stomach. 3 months now. The sickness had passed, replaced by a constant, low-level exhaustion that made every task feel twice as hard. Behind her, Gideon was building a cradle. He'd been at it for 2 weeks, working by lamplight after his daily chores were done. The wood was pine, sanded smooth enough that no splinter could threaten tiny skin. He carved animals into the headboard, a deer, an owl, a mountain lion, things their child would see growing up in this wild place. "You should rest," he said without looking up. "I'm fine. You've been standing there for 20 minutes. "I'm thinking." "About?" She turned to face him. "About Crowley's trial. It starts next week." Gideon's hand stilled on the wood. "I know. We have to go back. I know that too." Neither of them wanted to. The mountain had become their sanctuary, a place where the outside world couldn't reach them. Going back to Silver Falls meant testifying, reliving everything, facing people who still looked at Gideon like he was a killer, which, technically, he was, just not the kind they thought. "How long will we be gone?" Evelyn asked. "A week. Maybe 2, depending on how fast the trial moves." He set down his carving tools. "Judge Morrison sent word that federal prosecutors have enough evidence to convict without our testimony, but it'll be stronger if we're there." "Then we go." "You don't have to. Doctor said you should avoid stress." "The doctor said a lot of things." Evelyn crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "I need to be there."
I need to look Crowley in the eye when they read the verdict. Gideon studied her face. For your father? For all of them. Everyone he destroyed. She paused. And for me, I need to see it finished. He nodded slowly. Then we'll go. Together.
They left the following Monday, riding down through early snow that made the trail treacherous. Gideon led, testing each step before allowing the horses forward. Evelyn followed, one hand on the reins, the other pressed protectively over her growing belly. The trip took 3 days instead of 2. By the time Silver Falls appeared on the horizon, Evelyn was exhausted, saddle-sore, and ready to sleep for a week. Instead, she walked into the courthouse the next morning and came face to face with Walter Crowley for the first time since they dragged him away in chains. He looked smaller than she remembered, thinner. His expensive suit hung loose on a frame that had lost weight in captivity, but his eyes still held that cold calculation, that absolute certainty that he was smarter than everyone else in the room. He smiled when he saw her. Evelyn didn't smile back. The trial lasted 6 days. The prosecution laid out everything: the falsified ledgers, the forged contracts, Webb's letters detailing systematic fraud going back 15 years, testimony from families Crowley had destroyed, evidence of bribes paid to officials throughout the territory, and the murder charges. Samuel Hart's death, Joseph Webb's convenient accident, 2 other men who'd threatened to expose Crowley and ended up dead under suspicious circumstances. The courtroom was packed. People stood in the aisles, pressed against walls, crowded outside the windows. Everyone wanted to see the man who'd terrorized the territory for so long finally answer for his crimes. Evelyn testified on the 3rd day. She walked to the witness stand with her head high, wearing the only decent dress she owned. One Gideon had bought her in Silver Falls because her mountain clothes weren't appropriate for court. Her hands shook as she placed them on the rail, but her voice stayed steady. The prosecutor asked her to describe the marriage auction, the falsified debts, her father's death, everything Crowley had done. She told it all. When she finished, Crowley's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was a slick man from Denver, expensive and polished, the kind who made a living defending people who could afford to buy innocence. Mrs. Vale, he began smoothly, isn't it true that you willingly married Gideon Vale, a known killer? Objection, the prosecutor said. Relevance? Goes to credibility, Your Honor. This witness married a violent criminal. That suggests questionable judgment. Judge Morrison frowned. I'll allow it. But make your point quickly, counselor. The lawyer turned back to Evelyn. Well, Mrs. Vale, you did marry a man with blood on his hands, did you not? Evelyn met his gaze. I married a man who gave me a choice. That's more than your client ever offered anyone. But you knew his reputation. I knew what people said about him, and I knew what I saw. A man willing to stand up to a corrupt banker when no one else would. She leaned forward. Your client killed my father, killed Joseph Webb, destroyed dozens of families, and when someone finally tried to stop him, you're sitting here questioning my judgment. The lawyer's smile faltered. I'm simply establishing. You're trying to make the jury forget what this trial is about. Evelyn's voice hardened. It's not about who I married. It's about a man who used his power to steal, cheat, and murder for 15 years, and everyone in this territory knows it. Silence filled the courtroom. The lawyer opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the judge. Morrison raised an eyebrow. You have further questions, counselor? No, Your Honor. Then the witness is dismissed. Evelyn walked back to her seat beside Gideon. He took her hand and squeezed once. You did good, he whispered. I'm not done yet. Gideon testified the next day. Watching him walk to the witness stand was harder than Evelyn expected. People stared, whispered. The stories about him had grown over the years, each retelling adding bodies, exaggerating violence, turning a man into a monster. But when he sat down and placed his hand on the Bible, he just looked tired. The prosecutor asked about the land wars, the killings, what really happened 10 years ago. Gideon told the truth. 4 ranchers were trying to force homesteaders off their land, he said. Legal homesteaders with federal claims. The ranchers didn't care. They wanted the water rights, so they started burning people out, killing livestock, threatening families. And you intervened? I tried talking first, tried getting the territorial marshal involved. He wouldn't come, said it was a local dispute. Gideon's jaw tightened. So when they came for the Morrison family, widow and 4 kids? I was there. What happened? They shot first. I shot back. He looked at the jury. 4 men died. I won't apologize for that. They came to kill a woman and her children. I stopped them. Did you report this to authorities? I tried. But the ranchers' families had money, influence. Within a week, there were wanted posters with my name on them, murder charges, so I left. Why not stay and fight the charges? Because I knew how it would end, same way it always ends when poor people fight rich ones. His eyes found Evelyn across the courtroom. Until now, the defense attorney tried to shake his testimony, tried to paint him as a vigilante, a killer, someone who took the law into his own hands. Gideon didn't flinch. I did what I had to do, he said simply. Same as I did when I married Evelyn to save her from your client. Same as I'd do again if someone needed help. So you admit to violence. I admit to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. He leaned forward. But the man on trial here isn't me. It's Walter Crowley, and we both know what he's guilty of. The lawyer had no response to that. On the 6th day, closing arguments finished by noon. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Evelyn sat in the courtroom holding Gideon's hand, watching the clock tick forward. Around them, the crowd waited in tense silence. When the jury filed back in, she couldn't read their faces. The foreman stood. Judge Morrison asked for the verdict. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Evelyn's breath caught. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. Crowley's face went pale. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Samuel Hart, we find the defendant guilty. Someone in the gallery gasped. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Joseph Webb, we find the defendant guilty. The foreman continued through all 17 charges. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Every single one. When he finished, the courtroom exploded. People shouting, crying, embracing. A woman in the back collapsed in relief. Men who'd lost everything to Crowley's schemes stood with tears running down their faces. Evelyn just sat there, numb. It was over. Really over. Judge Morrison banged his gavel, calling for order. When the room finally quieted, he looked at Crowley. Walter Crowley, you have been found guilty on all charges. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say? Crowley stood slowly. For a long moment, he just stared at the judge. Then his gaze swept across the courtroom, landing on Evelyn. This isn't justice, he said quietly. It's revenge. No, Evelyn said, surprising herself by speaking. Justice is what you denied my father, what you denied Webb and the Calloway family and everyone else you destroyed. This, she gestured at the courtroom, this is just consequences. Crowley's expression twisted. You self-righteous little... That's enough. Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. Mr. Crowley, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in the territorial prison. You will also forfeit all assets obtained through illegal means to be distributed as restitution to your victims. He banged the gavel one final time. Court is adjourned. They dragged Crowley away in chains. He didn't look at Evelyn again. Outside the courthouse, people crowded around them. Families whose lives had been destroyed wanted to shake Evelyn's hand. Thank Gideon. Share their relief that the nightmare was finally over. Sheriff Maddox appeared through the crowd. His arm was still in a sling from the shoulder wound he'd taken during the fight in Silver Falls. But he was smiling. You did it, he said. We all did, Evelyn replied. No. You started this. You had the courage to fight back when everyone else was too afraid. He extended his good hand. Thank you. Evelyn shook it. How's Carter? He'll live. Lost the use of 2 fingers, but the doctor says he'll keep the arm. Maddox's expression sobered. He asked me to tell you he'd do it again. All of it. Said standing up to Crowley was worth whatever it cost. Tell him I said the same thing. They stayed in Silver Falls for 2 more days, tying up loose ends. Judge Morrison formally dismissed all charges against Gideon. The territorial governor issued a pardon. The wanted posters were burned. Gideon Vale was no longer a fugitive. He was just a man trying to build a life with his wife. On their last night before heading back to the mountain, they had dinner with Maddox and Morrison. The conversation was easy, comfortable, the kind that happened between people who'd survived something terrible together. What will you do now? Morrison asked. Go home, Gideon said simply. Live quiet. You've earned it. Morrison raised his glass. To justice, and to the people brave enough to fight for it. They drank to that. The ride back to Black Hollow Ridge took 4 days. Evelyn's body was changing faster now, making her clumsy in the saddle, easily tired. Gideon insisted on stopping frequently, letting her rest, making sure she ate enough. I'm pregnant, not dying, she protested on the 3rd day. I know, but I'm not taking chances. She wanted to argue, but the protective concern in his eyes stopped her. This was new territory for both of them. Neither had grown up with examples of what a good marriage looked like. They were figuring it out as they went, stumbling through intimacy and partnership like children learning to walk. But they were learning. When the cabin finally came into view, Evelyn nearly cried with relief. Home. They'd been gone 3 weeks. Snow had drifted against the door again. Ice hung from the eaves. But the structure was sound, the barn intact, the clearing undisturbed. Gideon helped her down from the horse. Welcome back. It's good to be back. They spent the rest of the day settling in. Gideon cleared snow and restocked firewood while Evelyn unpacked their supplies and aired out the cabin. By evening, the fire was roaring, soup was heating, and everything felt right again. That night, lying in bed with Gideon's arm around her and his hand resting on her growing belly, Evelyn finally let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. They'd exposed a corrupt banker, freed an entire territory from his control, brought justice for the dead, and somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. What are you thinking about? Gideon asked quietly. Everything. Nothing. She shifted to face him. I was terrified that day in the church. When you kissed me, when you demanded the preacher marry us, I thought I was trading one monster for another. You weren't wrong to be scared. No, but I was wrong about you. She touched his face. You're not a monster. You're just a man who's done hard things in a hard world. Same could be said about you now. She thought about the bounty hunter she'd shot, the fire in Silver Falls, the moment she'd pulled the trigger and watched a man fall. Yeah, she said softly. I guess it could. Regret any of it? Did she? The violence, the blood, the transformation from frightened town girl to mountain woman who could kill when necessary? No, she said finally. I regret what it took to get here. I regret my father dying. I regret not seeing what Crowley was sooner, but this... She gestured at the cabin, at him, at the life they were building. I don't regret any of this. Gideon pulled her closer. Our child's going to grow up different from us. How so? Safe. Free from the kind of fear we lived with. His voice was rough. No debts. No corruption. No one coming to take what's ours. You promise that? I'll die before I let anyone hurt this family. Evelyn believed him, but she also knew the world didn't work that way. Promises couldn't stop every danger. Love couldn't prevent every tragedy. All they could do was fight for each day they had together. Winter deepened. The snow piled higher. Some days they couldn't leave the cabin at all, trapped inside by blizzards that turned the world white and howling. Evelyn didn't mind. She spent those days reading the few books they had, practicing her sewing on baby clothes, watching Gideon work on the cradle. He'd moved on to building actual furniture now. A larger table, more chairs, shelves for the books and supplies, making room for the family they were becoming. One afternoon in late January, while Gideon was outside checking the barn, Evelyn felt the baby kick for the first time. It was faint, just a flutter like butterfly wings against her palm. But it was real. When Gideon came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, she grabbed his hand and pressed it to her stomach. Wait. Stay still. He froze. What am I... The baby kicked again. Stronger this time. Gideon's eyes went wide. Was that... That was your son. Or daughter. He dropped to his knees in front of her, both hands on her belly now, waiting for another movement. When it came, his face transformed. All the hardness, all the scars and violence and years of loneliness, they disappeared. He looked young, hopeful, almost boyish. Hey there, he whispered to her stomach. I'm your father, and I'm going to love you more than anything in this world. Evelyn's eyes burned. You're already a good father. I don't know how to be a father.
Neither of us knows what we're doing. We'll figure it out together. He looked up at her. I'm scared. The admission surprised her. Gideon never admitted fear. Of what? Of failing, of not being enough, of this baby looking at me one day and seeing a killer instead of a father. His voice cracked. I've done terrible things, Evelyn. What if I can't leave that behind? She slid off the chair and knelt beside him. You already have left it behind. You're not the same man who walked into that church 8 months ago. How do you know? Because that man was alone, isolated, convinced he'd never deserve anything good. She took his face in her hands. You're not alone anymore. And you deserve this. Us. All of it. Gideon kissed her then, desperate and grateful, and full of everything he couldn't put into words. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you. I love you too. They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the cabin grew cold. Then Gideon rebuilt the flames, and they sat together in front of the hearth, planning for the future their child would inherit. Spring came late to Black Hollow Ridge. Snow lingered through April. But by May, the world was transforming. Wildflowers bloomed across the clearing. Deer returned to graze. Birds built nests in the eaves. And Evelyn's belly swelled until she could barely see her own feet. Any day now, Gideon said, helping her into a chair one evening in late May. The baby will come when the baby comes. That's not helpful. She laughed. Neither is you hovering. I'm not hovering. You've asked me if I'm okay 17 times today. That's not hovering. That's concern. It's hovering. He started to argue, then stopped. Fine, I'm hovering, but you're carrying my child. I'm allowed to hover. Fair enough. They'd sent word to Silver Falls 2 weeks earlier, asking the doctor to come when the time was close. But Dr. Hendricks was dealing with an outbreak of influenza and couldn't make the trip. So it was just them. Evelyn tried not to panic about that. Women had been giving birth without doctors for thousands of years. She'd be fine. Probably. The contraction started just after midnight. Evelyn woke to pain radiating across her lower back. She lay still for a moment, trying to breathe through it, hoping it was false labor. It wasn't. Gideon. She shook his shoulder. Wake up. He was alert instantly. What's wrong? The baby's coming. She'd never seen him move so fast. He had the fire built up, water heating, clean cloth laid out within minutes. His hands shook as he worked, but his voice stayed calm. Tell me what you need. I don't know. Another contraction hit. Evelyn gasped, gripping the edge of the table. I don't know what I need. Okay? Okay. It's okay. He helped her to the bed. I've delivered foals, calves. It can't be that different. It's extremely different. Right. Of course. He ran a hand through his hair. Maybe we should. There's nothing to do but wait. Evelyn tried to smile. Failed. Just stay with me. I'm not going anywhere. The labor lasted 14 hours. Evelyn lost track of time somewhere around hour 6. Everything blurred into pain and pressure, and Gideon's voice talking her through each contraction. He never left her side, never complained, just held her hand, wiped her forehead, whispered encouragement when she wanted to give up. I can't do this, she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. Yes, you can. No, I can't. It hurts too much. You fought off bounty hunters, survived a gunfight, took down a corrupt banker. Gideon's voice was fierce. You can do this. That was different. How? I had a gun then. Despite everything, he laughed. You're the strongest person I know, and you're about to bring our child into the world. So dig deep and push. She pushed and kept pushing. And when the sun finally broke over the mountains, filling the cabin with golden light, their daughter entered the world screaming. Gideon caught her with shaking hands. He stared at the tiny, wrinkled, perfect creature in his arms, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. It's a girl, he whispered. Evelyn collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and relieved and overwhelmed. Is she okay? She's perfect. He wrapped the baby in clean cloth and brought her to Evelyn. She's absolutely perfect. Their daughter had dark hair and eyes that couldn't quite focus yet. Her tiny fist wrapped around Evelyn's finger, gripping tight. Hello? Evelyn whispered. We've been waiting for you.
The baby stopped crying, as if recognizing her mother's voice. Gideon sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Evelyn, the other supporting their daughter. His eyes were wet. "What do we name her?" he asked. Evelyn had thought about this, gone through dozens of possibilities during the long winter months. "Sarah," she said, "after my mother, and hope for a middle name." "Sarah Hope Vale." Gideon tested it. "I like it." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He kissed the top of the baby's head. "Welcome home, Sarah Hope. Welcome home." The first few weeks were chaos. Sarah cried constantly. Day, night, it didn't matter. Evelyn was exhausted, sore, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of keeping another human alive. But Gideon surprised her. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Sarah when she wouldn't sleep, sang rough lullabies in a voice that was more growl than melody, but somehow soothed the baby anyway. "Where did you learn that song?" Evelyn asked one night, watching him pace with Sarah. "My mother used to sing it before she died." "You never talk about her." "Not much to say. She died when I was 7. My father followed 2 years later." He adjusted Sarah's blanket. "I ended up in an orphanage until I was old enough to work. That's how I ended up in the territory." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. If any of that had gone differently, I wouldn't be here. Wouldn't have you, wouldn't have her." He looked down at Sarah. "So I'm grateful for every terrible thing that led me here." Evelyn understood that. The path to happiness was rarely straight. Often, it was the worst moments that led to the best ones. If her father hadn't died, if Crowley hadn't tried to sell her, if Gideon hadn't walked into that church, none of this would exist. It was a strange thing to be grateful for tragedy. But there it was. Summer arrived in full force, turning the mountain green and warm. Sarah grew stronger, sleeping longer, crying less. Evelyn regained her strength slowly, learning to balance motherhood with the endless demands of mountain life. One afternoon in July, a visitor arrived. Evelyn heard the horse before she saw it. She stepped outside with Sarah in her arms, the other hand resting on the rifle propped against the doorframe. Old habits died hard, but the rider who emerged from the trees wasn't a threat. Sheriff Maddox sat his horse, looking older and more tired than the last time she'd seen him, but he was smiling. "Mrs. Vale," he called. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Sheriff Maddox." Evelyn shifted Sarah to one hip. "What brings you all the way up here?" "Wanted to deliver some news in person." He dismounted, approaching slowly. "May I?" She nodded. Gideon appeared from the barn, rifle in hand. When he saw Maddox, he relaxed slightly, but didn't lower the weapon. "Sheriff?" "Mr. Vale." Maddox tipped his hat. "Congratulations on the baby." "Thank you." Gideon moved to stand beside Evelyn. "What news?" "Walter Crowley died 2 weeks ago. Heart failure," the prison doctor said. Evelyn felt nothing at first. Then relief flooded through her. "He's really dead?" "Really dead." They buried him in an unmarked grave outside the prison walls. Maddox's expression was grim. "Figured you'd want to know. Thank you for coming all this way. There's more." He pulled a document from his coat. "The territorial court finished processing Crowley's assets. Your father's land, the property Crowley seized, it's being returned to you. Clear title, no debts." Evelyn stared at the paper. Her father's land. The small farm where she'd grown up. The place Crowley had stolen after the murder. It was hers again. "I don't want it," she said. Both men looked at her in surprise. "You don't want the land?" Maddox asked. "Sell it. Use the money for the families Crowley destroyed. There are people in Ash Creek who lost everything. Give them their lives back." "Evelyn," Gideon started. "I mean it." She looked up at him. "That land is full of ghosts. I don't want Sarah growing up haunted by what happened there. This—" She gestured at the cabin, the clearing, the mountains. "This is our home now." Gideon's expression softened. "You're sure?" "Completely." Maddox nodded slowly. "I'll make sure it's handled properly. The families will be grateful." They invited him to stay for dinner. He accepted, and they spent the evening talking about everything that had happened in the months since the trial. Ash Creek was recovering. New businesses were opening. Families were rebuilding. The scars would take years to heal, but they were healing. As the sun set and Maddox prepared to leave, He turned to Evelyn one last time. Your father would be proud of you, he said quietly. Evelyn's throat tightened. You think so?
I know so. You brought down the man who killed him. You freed a whole territory from corruption, and you did it with more courage than most men I know. He glanced at Sarah, sleeping in Gideon's arms. That little girl is lucky to have you as a mother. After he left, Evelyn stood in the clearing, watching the stars emerge. Gideon joined her, still holding Sarah. You okay? Yeah, just thinking. About what?
About how different everything is. A year ago, I was trapped, terrified, convinced my life was over. She leaned against him. Now I'm here, with you, with her. And I'm happy. Happy looks good on you. She smiled. It feels good, too. They stood there until the mosquitoes drove them inside. Then they put Sarah in her cradle, the one Gideon had built with his own hands, and climbed into bed. As Evelyn drifted toward sleep, Gideon's voice broke the silence.
I was thinking about building an addition, a second bedroom for when Sarah gets older. That's a good idea. Maybe a proper kitchen, too, and a porch. You planning to turn this cabin into a mansion? Just want to give our family everything they need. Evelyn rolled over to face him. We already have everything we need. Yeah? Yeah. She kissed him softly. We have each other. That's enough. You always this wise? Only since I married an outlaw. He pulled her close, and they fell asleep tangled together, the way they had every night since that first desperate kiss in the church. The years that followed were good ones. Not perfect. Nothing ever was. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, summers when drought threatened the garden Evelyn had planted, illnesses that scared them both until they passed. But they survived. Sarah grew into a wild, fearless child who could track deer before she could write her name. Gideon taught her everything: how to hunt, how to survive, how to respect the mountain that was their home. Evelyn taught her reading and arithmetic and the stories of where they came from. She never hid the truth about Walter Crowley or the violence that had brought them to this mountain. Sarah deserved to know that good things sometimes came from terrible circumstances, that courage mattered more than comfort, that standing up for what was right might cost everything but was worth it anyway. When Sarah was 3, Evelyn gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel, after her father. When Sarah was 6, another daughter arrived, Anna, after Gideon's mother. The cabin grew, room by room, year by year, until it was a proper house. They added the porch Gideon had promised, a real kitchen, separate bedrooms for the children. They built a life. And slowly, the stories about Gideon Vale changed. He wasn't the monster of Black Hollow Ridge anymore. He was the mountain man who'd helped lost travelers, who'd shared meat with struggling families during hard winters, who'd pulled a child from a frozen river and carried her 5 miles to the nearest doctor. The wanted posters had been burned, the warrants dismissed, the past buried. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but no longer the only thing that defined him. One evening, when Sarah was 10 and the younger children were asleep, she asked the question Evelyn had been expecting for years. Mama, were you scared when you married Papa? They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Gideon was inside, reading to Samuel and Anna. Evelyn considered her answer carefully. Yes, I was terrified. Because of the stories about him? Because I didn't know him. Because marrying someone is always scary, even when you think you know what you're getting into. Sarah thought about that. Do you regret it? Not for 1 second. Even though people died? Even though it was dangerous? Even though, Evelyn looked at her daughter. Sometimes the most important things in life are the ones we have to fight for. Your father gave me a choice when no one else would. He protected me when he didn't have to. He loved me when I thought I'd never be loved again. That's how you know it's real love? Sarah asked. When someone fights for you? That's one way, but the real test is what comes after. Anyone can be brave for a moment. Love is choosing someone every day, through the boring parts and the hard parts, and the parts where you want to scream at each other. She smiled. Your father and I have had plenty of all 3. Sarah laughed. You do argue a lot. We're both stubborn. It's part of our charm. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Then Sarah said quietly, I want to be brave like you when I grow up.
Evelyn's throat tightened. You're already brave. How do you know? Because you ask hard questions. You're not afraid of the truth, and you love fiercely, just like your father. She pulled Sarah close. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. Love people even when it's scary. Inside, Gideon finished the story and appeared in the doorway. He looked at them sitting together, mother and daughter, and smiled. Bedtime, he called to Sarah. Sarah groaned but stood. She kissed Evelyn's cheek, then went inside. Gideon took her place on the bench. What were you two talking about? Love, courage, the usual. Heavy topics for a 10-year-old. She asked. I answered. Evelyn leaned against him. Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't walked into that church? Every day? And I'm grateful I did. He wrapped an arm around her. You saved me, Evelyn, not the other way around. I think we saved each other. Maybe. He kissed the top of her head. But you definitely saved me first. They sat there as night fell completely. Two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way and built something beautiful from the ashes. Inside, their children slept safely. Tomorrow they'd wake to another day of chores and lessons and the 1,000 small moments that made up a life. It wasn't the life Evelyn had imagined for herself as a girl in Ash Creek. It was better, because it was real, hard-won, built on honesty and trust and the kind of love that survived everything the world threw at it. On Black Hollow Ridge, where loneliness had once ruled like winter, a family thrived. Not perfect, never perfect, but theirs. And that was enough. Years later, when Evelyn was old and her hair had gone gray, she would sit on that same porch and tell her grandchildren about the day their grandfather walked into a church and changed everything. She'd tell them about courage and fear and the fine line between the two. She'd tell them that sometimes the people we're taught to fear are the ones we need most. She'd tell them that love wasn't always soft or easy or safe. Sometimes it was desperate and fierce and forged in fire. But most importantly, she'd tell them that choosing yourself, choosing freedom, choosing to fight back, choosing to believe you deserved better, that was where everything good began. Because that's what she'd learned on the day a mountain man kissed her in front of a shocked congregation and asked her to trust him. That sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the monsters turned out to be heroes after all.